Hi everyone, I haven't made a YouTube video in years at this point, and I've had a lot of people who have said they're super interested in the videos that I've made before, and so I'm back. I want to talk a little bit more about my experiences and my past, and it seems like my story resonates with a lot of people, so I'm excited to talk a little bit about how I got to where I'm at. So in this video, we're going to talk about why I left religion. Why, even though I was raised Christian, and back when I was doing YouTube several years ago, I was dabbling in other religions. I was considering Islam, I was considering, 4 years ago I was reading the Quran alongside several other holy books, and I was comparing them to the Bible. And I think it would be a good way to get back into it by talking about where I'm at now and why I ended up leaving the faith that I was raised with. So there are 4 things that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about first why I stopped reading the Quran, some assumptions about leaving religion, and then I want to tell some stories about how my thought process changed. And I think those stories really illustrate what is so crucial about religion. And then finally, I'm going to talk about where I'm at now and how I have left religion behind entirely and what that's done for me. So first of all, why did I stop reading the Quran? Originally, I was reading the book so that I could understand a little bit more what the parallels were between Islam and Christianity. I knew some people who had converted to Islam, and they had found that the God of the Quran, also known as Allah, had been a more welcoming presence for them. It had brought them a greater community and something that they really appreciated. And so I was curious to see what made the Bible different, if there was anything at all that really made the Bible stand out from other books, because what I had been taught was that the Bible was the truth. And I had been memorizing passages from the Bible from a super early age. And I had read the Bible multiple times by the time I started reading the Quran and other holy books. What the Quran helped me identify was the religious parallels between many different holy books. And what it proved to me was that the Bible was not unique. And that was enough for me to get what I felt like I needed out of reading the Quran, because it showed me that the Bible and the Quran are so similar that I really didn't have anything to believe in anymore. So I'll get a little bit more into that when I tell those stories. The second thing I want to talk about is assumptions about leaving religion, because I think a lot of people assume that because I had not the greatest childhood in the world, that maybe I was not taught religion correctly, or I didn't understand God to be a God of love, or I didn't embrace the version of religion that has made a lot of other people very happy. So it could be because of the upbringing that I had, it could be because I was angry at God, it could be because I had bad experiences with people. Really all it boils down to is people assuming that people leave religion because they had a bad experience with religion. And that, for me, was not the case. It was very much, I believed hardcore in the religion that I was taught, and I was trying to really defend my religion and come up with as many arguments as possible to show that my religion was true. And as I researched it more and more, I found less and less evidence to support my position. I want to talk in these stories about how it was the evidence that led me to get away from religion. It was not just because I had a bad experience, and it wasn't until after I had actually lost all of those other factors in my life that I ended up leaving religion altogether. I still stuck to the idea of God being with me and of being a good Christian, even after I lost my family, even after I had questioned so much and had created controversies in multiple churches, all of these things. Even after all of those things had happened, it was finally when I was at a place where I could kind of not have any strings attached to my religion that I was finally able to just look at it and see, is this true? Do I believe it? And if I believe something that I can't back up, where does that put me? And those were the questions I was asking myself, even after I had pretty much lost everything that had strings attached to my religion. I'd like to tell you some stories about my own past. I think it's helpful to share stories about belief so that anyone who is questioning where they're at can kind of understand what thought processes helped other people to walk away from their religion, or to find another religion, or to find whatever it is that fills that gap in their life, I suppose. But it's important to tell stories about it rather than just having debates or writing articles or trying to condense everything into a short period of time. Even though I'm doing this right now with a video, the beliefs don't change overnight. You're not going to believe in an entire category of things and then immediately wipe all of that away without there being a lot of cognitive dissonance that you're dealing with in the process. For me, it was a deconstruction process. It was a process of study and learning, and it wasn't just one conversation that I had with one person. It was many conversations with many people that led to me wanting to research, and then those conversations led to me doing research on my own. And reading entire books helped me to rethink my thought process and consider what kind of evidence was convincing to me and what kind of evidence really didn't hold any water in the end. So the first story I want to tell happened when I was about 16. I wanted to compete in an event called Apologetics. Apologetics is a Christian term in Christian theology that means to give a defense for your faith. And I was very deep in religion at the time. I was a deeply dedicated Christian, and I wanted to know more about my religion. So the Apologetics competition that I did was a speech event in which you had a certain amount of time to prepare a short speech on one of a certain number of topics that you could draw from an envelope. So there were 100 topics total. I won't get into all of them because they were all over the place in addressing matters of Christian doctrine. So it had to do with the fall of man, the belief in original sin, the belief in the truth of the Bible, and the one that really stood out to me was a question of inerrancy. Now, inerrancy is another Christian term, and that means that the Bible is completely true and without error. In fact, some people who preach inerrancy go so far as to say that the Bible is incapable of having any error. That is, that God intervenes in the process of translating the Bible so that it can never be misinterpreted, which is hilarious now to think back on, but at the time, being a teenager, I was researching it, and I was supposed to give speeches just defending these points of doctrine. And as I researched, I found that there was really not that much evidence for the truth, the inerrancy of the Bible. And this really frustrated me because I had been taught that the Bible was true. Like I said, I had been memorizing it from a super young age. And so to realize that the Bible didn't have tons of evidence behind it. And what I mean by that is that if you go back and look at biblical history, many Christians don't know these facts, but it's true that the Gospels that are supposed to be written about the life and times of Jesus Christ weren't written until about 30 years after he had already died. And there are many different things that take place to talk about how the transcription of the Bible happened, how it was translated from other languages, and how all that oversight happened. But as I was researching, me being distrusting of authority and of councils and of people who make decisions from the top down, I realized that many of those types of decisions had been made surrounding the creation of the Bible itself. There was the Council of Nicaea that put together the Bible and decided what to keep and what to throw away. And we still don't have access to much of what they threw away. And it left me with a lot of questions, and it left me questioning not just the inerrancy of the Bible and whether it was true, but it left me questioning whether the Bible had any integrity behind it in its current form, and I couldn't find much evidence to support that. So that was the beginning when I was a teenager, starting to think about whether everything I had been taught was really true, because the foundation was the Bible. The Bible told us what was true, and as soon as I started looking into the history of how the Bible was made, I couldn't find a lot of evidence to support the integrity of how it had been made. So that's what started it. It was when I was in college, just before I turned 21, that I went on a road trip with someone, and we had a fascinating conversation that made me think about holy books in a way that I had never thought about them before. She told me about Zoroastrianism, which is an ancient religion and probably one of the first monotheistic religions. And Zoroastrians have a holy book called the Zendavesta. But interestingly, the Zendavesta does not have a claim of inerrancy around it, the way that the Bible does and the way that the Quran does for Muslims. It doesn't have this weight simply because Zoroastrians understand that it was passed down from oral tradition. Now that to me speaks a lot to the integrity of the Zendavesta, because rather than having councils or people in power making decisions from the top down on what should be included and what to just completely destroy, it's known as something that was written down to the best of their ability based on oral tradition. And that to me makes a lot more sense than trying to write things afterward and then passing it off as something that happened at the exact same time. In addition to studying holy books, another huge factor in understanding and deconstructing my religion was comparing it to logic and astronomy. One story that was really appealing to me was The Dragon in My Garage by Carl Sagan, in his book The Demon-Haunted World. This is pretty short, so I'm just going to read it. A fire-breathing dragon lives in my garage. Suppose I seriously make such an assertion to you. Surely you'd want to check it out and see for yourself. There have been innumerable stories of dragons over the centuries, but no real evidence. What an opportunity. Show me, you say. I lead you to my garage. You look inside and see a ladder, empty paint cans, an old tricycle, but no dragon. Where's the dragon, you ask? Oh, she's right here, I reply, waving vaguely. I neglected to mention that she's an invisible dragon. You propose spreading flour on the floor of the garage to capture the dragon's footprints. Good idea, I say, but this dragon floats in the air. Then you'll use an infrared sensor to detect the invisible fire. Good idea, but the invisible fire is also heatless. You'll spray paint the dragon to make her visible. Good idea, but she's an incorporeal dragon, and the paint won't stick, and so on. I counter every physical test you propose with a special explanation of why it won't work. Now the last bit really brings it all together. What's the difference between an invisible, incorporeal, floating dragon who spits heatless fire and no dragon at all? If there's no way to disprove my contention, no conceivable experiment that would count against it, what does it mean to say that my dragon exists? Your inability to invalidate my hypothesis is not at all the same thing as proving it true. Claims that cannot be tested, assertions immune to disproof, are veridically worthless, whatever value they may have, in inspiring us or in exciting our sense of wonder. What I'm asking you to do comes down to believing in the absence of evidence on my say-so. This example changed everything for me because it really made me ask the question, is my invisible, incorporeal God real? Because I had no evidence leading up until that point. The only evidence I had was that I could hear from God. I'll talk about prayer in a minute, but I also want to talk about astronomy. Shortly after I had read The Demon-Haunted World, a friend of mine dragged me to an astronomy class, and it was there that someone finally laid out the hard science-based evidence for me. And they showed me that it was impossible for all of the stars to be less than 6,000 years old, because it takes tens of thousands of years for the elements that exist in our world and make human beings and all animal life and all life we know of possible. All of the elements that we have would not be there if not for stars. Stars specifically that have already exploded and died and put everything that they had burning out into the universe. We exist today because of stars that died thousands of years before creation ever told me it was possible. Once someone explained to me that I am made of star stuff, that made so much more sense to me. And I was convinced by hard, concrete evidence, rather than being told this thing happened based on a holy book. I mean, not to mention the generations upon generations of reinforcing that religion for young children. Now I want to talk a little bit about prayer, and how practicing prayer and applying logic to it made me lose my faith in God altogether. It was this internal process of constantly being aware of where my thoughts were coming from and thinking through, is this my own thought or is this external? I definitely thought that my thoughts could be influenced by some kind of outside deity. The reason it's so important to talk about prayer is because it's so central to the Christian life. I genuinely believed that about 50% of my thoughts were not thoughts that I was having in my own head, but were thoughts that were entering from an outside source, and I attributed that to God. Now I believe that all of those thoughts are my own, and the reason I got to that position was because I applied evidence to this prayer life that I had. I kept a journal for an entire year in which I compared my prayers with how those prayers were being answered. And over time, with weeks turning into months and taking notes all the way, I finally came to the conclusion that my prayers were only being answered because I was only praying for what was possible. I had certain limitations that I put on myself. I didn't want to pray for anyone who was already getting medical help because it would be impossible to, based on evidence, differentiate between whether my prayer had fixed things or whether the medical intervention had fixed things. And once I got to the point where I wasn't holding God to any of those standards anymore, there was no point in praying to that God anymore, because I knew that none of those prayers were going to have any consistent impact on reality. Now I think that all of those prayers and all of the things that I believe that I heard from God, I think they were all just thoughts that were happening inside my own head. I had simply been trained to attribute those thoughts to an outside source. Those are the main stories about what led to the deconstruction of my faith. It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just those 4 things. It was a process of unpacking what I had learned and what I had been taught to believe was true. So where am I at now? I consider myself an atheist. I'm 100% certain that God does not exist, and that puts me at a 7 on the Richard Dawkins scale of atheism and agnosticism. The reason I don't believe in God anymore is because I came to understand that all of the evidence for God was based on tradition. The symbolism of Jesus Christ is so beyond fucked up that it's not even something I can get into in depth in this video, which is why I haven't mentioned it at all. And I think it definitely scarred me as a child to be so aware of someone being tortured slowly to death for me or because of me. That's what I was taught. And that guilt and that shame is very real, and it's very damaging to children. And so I believe wholeheartedly, not just that God isn't real, but that it is damaging to tell children that God is real, and to tell those children specific things about God, because it takes so much work to deconstruct your beliefs after that point. It takes so much work to come to understand what evidence really looks like and what logic really is. As I've deconstructed my faith, I've also learned how to grow through the trauma of those violent images of my early childhood, these ideas that religion And even the very best, floweriest parts of religion are very rooted in torture and in the evil that humans do to one another. So I'm still, in many ways, recovering from that and figuring out how to deal with living in a universe that's rather empty compared to one that is full of an all-present God. Religion can be very traumatic for children, and that's why I don't think it's a good idea to introduce it to them as the ultimate truth. Because for me, I took it very, very seriously, and it went so deep, and it's still something that I'm recovering from. I hope my story resonates with people, and that it helps them in figuring out where they're at with religion. And the cautionary tale I would like to offer is be aware of your surroundings, and think about how your religion affects the people around you. And I would hope that you're not teaching the way you see things as the ultimate truth to impressionable children. So those are some of the stories that illustrate how things happened for me as I was leaving my religion. It wasn't just because I had a bad experience. It had everything to do with logic and evidence and science and coming to an understanding of how reality is, and having a real commitment to wanting to believe in what is true. Now, to end the video on a softer note, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are in the comments, and if you have any ideas for upcoming videos, any questions you'd like me to answer, I would love to hear from you. And check out my Patreon, where I am working on my blog and a memoir, and also on YouTube now. Thanks for watching!